up, that's the world's tallest building. Now, to put the height of the Burj Khalifa into perspective, it's easy to do. All I gotta do is look to the top of Trump Tower, add another Trump Tower on top of it. That is how tall the Burj Khalifa is. Not stopping Adrian Smith, though, so to give you guys the numbers, this building right here, it's 1,388 feet tall, where the Burj Khalifa is 2,717 feet tall. Not stopping Adrian Smith, he's working on another building in the Middle East in Jeddah called the Kingdom Tower. That's going to be the equivalent to 2.5 of these Trump buildings. Now on the right-hand side, poking out from behind Trump, you're about to see the corner of a black box building here, poking out from behind the Trump Tower. Now the corner of this black box building, there it is, and that is the American Medical Association building, originally built for IBM in the 1970s. It is also home to the British Langham Hotel, a hotel that is so British they serve afternoon tea every day. It's by reservation only though, if you are staying at the Langham. Now, this building is also very important to the world of architecture because it is the last office building of the architect known as Mies van der Rohe. Now, Mies van der Rohe, he came up into architecture around the mid-1900s, and as he was becoming an architect, a lot of architects around him were cladding their buildings in a lot of fancy carved stone and ornamentation. All this ornamentation was very beautiful, but it cost a lot of money, it took a lot of time, and it was unnecessary. Mies van der Rohe revolutionized architecture with this one phrase: less is more. He got rid of all that fancy, unnecessary stuff, focused on the function of the building, not just the outside of it. So to put his work in perspective, look at this black box building here. It's kind of a plain-looking building, right? But before Mies van der Rohe, no building in the world looked like that building. I know that's kind of weird to hear because if you've been to any modern city, every building looks like that now. It's that plain black box steel style, but that's called the International style, and it basically sparked the modernist movement of architecture. Now, Mies van der Rohe, he was a teacher. He also taught this whole less is more philosophy to other architects. Pretty sure one of his students disagreed with that whole less is more idea because that guy's name was Bertrand Goldberg, and he designed these two buildings right next to us on the right-hand side. The Corn Cobs, as they are better well known in Chicago, the actual name of them is Marina City Towers. Marina City Towers was built in 1967 by Bertrand Goldberg in an effort to attract middle-class workers downtown to live, because folks back in the day, no one wanted to live in downtown Chicago. It was not a very popular area. Most people just worked down here. So Bertrand designed those two buildings like a city inside of a city. On the inside, there was a roller rink, a grocery store, a doctor's office, a movie theater, a bowling alley, basically every accommodation you needed to live downtown. Now, the common questions I'll get about those two buildings: one, what do the apartments look like on the inside? I got a weird answer for you: a slice of pie. You enter the pointing, it goes outwards towards the balcony. And the other common question I'll get: has anybody ever driven off of a parking lot before? Yes, twice, but it was for TV and movies. Don't worry, nobody got hurt. A commercial in the early 2000s for an insurance company, and then before that, Steve McQueen's last film, The Hunter, they drove a car off that building as well. Now on the right-hand side, past the bridge, on the right, we're going to have the shorter red brick building here. Now the shorter red brick building, it's called the Muradoc Center, and there is something distinctly off about the architecture of this building. Now, we're going to play a little bit of a game for you guys to figure it out. As we pass the building, I want you guys to look all around it, and then I'm going to ask you what is weird about the building. I'm going to give 5 seconds to do this, to look all around the building. Here's a hint: it is not the skeleton on the second-story window. 5 seconds, look all around. Are y'all ready? Go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Could anybody tell me what is weird about that building? Just yell it out. Yes, one side has five windows, one side has 6 columns of windows. Now, it's asymmetrical. Look at the clock tower, count the columns of windows to the right. I'll do it for you, there are 6. Now look to the left of the clock tower, count the columns of windows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The entire building is asymmetrical. Why? This building was built in 1914, but the bridge we're going underneath right now was built in the 1930s. Whenever they put this bridge in, they had to extend out the street there, knock down a column of windows on the Murdoch Center, so it wasn't always asymmetrical. Now on our right here, we have one of the most environmentally friendly buildings in the city. It must have been a big night for events, I'm guessing weddings. But yes, this building, one of the most environmentally friendly buildings in the city, was built by Picard and Shilton in 2009, and they actually won a Platinum LEED certification. LEED stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. This building was built with over 60% recycled materials. And would you guys believe me if I told you no air conditioning units in that building? Now, the way they cool the building off is actually using river water. They pump it in through the walls, pump it out cleaner than it actually already was. That practice may be halted, though, because that heats the water up, which does affect the wildlife in the river. We do have wildlife here, over 70 different species of fish. Now, going back in time again, 1931, the Marshall Field Company, better known today as Macy's, they had 18 warehouse buildings scattered all around Chicago. They wanted to combine them into one. If you're thinking 18 warehouse buildings into one building, wouldn't that be a ridiculously giant building? Well, Look to the right, you'd be correct. This ridiculously giant building is called the Merchandise Mart. Built in 1931 by Graham Anderson, Probst and Wright, whenever this massive Art Deco building was first built, it was the largest concrete building in the country by square feet. Today it is only number 2. Does anybody know what number 1 is now? The Pentagon. Now the Merchandise Mart is over 4.2 million square feet of space, over 8 miles of hallway in that building, and until the 90s, that building had its own zip code. Now the Kennedy family, they actually purchased the Merchandise Mart in the 1940s for just $13 million, and then they sold that building in the 90s for $576 million. So if you're worried about the Kennedys' financial situation, why? Because they also purchased this land right here. Now this outcropping of land is called Wolf Point, and this apartment building here is called Wolf Point East, brand new, across the peninsula's Wolf Point West, which you can't see right now because it's getting blocked by this work in progress called the Salesforce Tower. Now this building should be completed by the end of this year, opening 2023. Now, the land this building sits on, it also holds a lot of historical significance. This is actually where Marquette and Joliet were first brought by the Potawatomi. Marquette and Joliet were the first non-native visitors to this land. Now, the Potawatomi, those were the indigenous people, whenever they first brought them here, they kept referring to the land as Chicago. Obviously, that's where we get the name Chicago. Now, Marquette and Joliet took that word Chicago as the name of the land, but they were incorrect. What the Potawatomi were saying when they said Chicago was actually the name of the crop that grew here. A natural onion that they used for medicine, had a very strong fragrance to it. That's what Chicago is. Folks, Chicago roughly translates into smelly onion. That is true. So take that, New York. You may get the Big Apple, but we're the smelly onion. Score 1 for Chicago. Now, the next building I'm talking about, almost directly in front of the boat right now, but it's about to be on our left-hand side. It's this slightly curved apartment building with the balconies on it, very aptly titled the Residencies of River Bend. Designed by James DeStefano in the 1990s, he designed every single apartment in this building to face the east, with a balcony facing towards the lake to provide an absolutely stunning view of this brand new apartment building right here. These 3 buildings were built in the last few years on Wolf Point, completely blocking the view of the main branch of the Chicago River that the Residencies of River Bend once had. Caused quite a stir in this building, especially because each of these apartments is worth over $1.2 million. The view definitely having something to do with that. Now we're going to keep to the left-hand side here with this red brick building. It's rectangular in shape called Fulton House. This is one of my favorites on the tour because it's the oldest building we're seeing on the tour today, this red brick one. Now Fulton House was built in 1889 as a dairy storage warehouse. It got redesigned in the 1980s by a guy named Harry Weiss. It got redesigned into an apartment building. Now, whenever Harry Weiss designs a building, an interesting thing he does, he adds nautical themes to it, themes involving the ocean. Now, a few of those nautical things that I can point out, the starfish climbing up the side of the building there, and then towards the top, those porthole-like windows with brick corning around that makes it look like waves, those were added by Harry Weiss as well. Now, kind of a gross story that comes with this building is that whenever they redesigned it in the 80s, the 1980s, for to be an apartment building, they had to pull about 22,000 pounds of matted cork and horsehair out of the 3-foot thick walls of that building. That's because this was an old raw paper material, or not raw paper material, sorry, it was an old dairy storage warehouse that was used as insulation. It was essentially a giant cooler. Now, Harry Weiss, nautical themes architect, he's got another building on the tour today. It's this very next one. This triangular-shaped building, it's 4 homes all connected into one building, all meant to look like a sailboat resting on top of the water. Now, 4 homes called the Chicago River Cottages. Now, they were designed by Harry Weiss in the 1980s, and each resident, whenever they moved in, paid about $180,000 each for their cottage. All 4 residents stayed there till last year. One moved out, put his cottage up for sale. It sold within a day for $3.6 million. So property value on the river in Chicago has changed quite a bit since the 80s. Good example of that would also be to the right. This long building here with the blue paneling on the outside of it, that is called the East Bank Club. It is a luxury athletic facility, or how I like to put it, it's where the jet set go to sweat. It's a super fancy gym. Now the reason I say this gym is super fancy, a few notable people have gone here. The Obama family as well as Oprah Winfrey have held memberships. Now the reason I say it's a good example of how property value has changed on the river in Chicago, whenever this building was built in the 1970s, there were no windows on this side of the building. That's because whenever you built on the river back in the day, you sealed the river off from view. You did not want to look at it, didn't want your customers to have to, oh, hi. Oh, see who you guys were waving at. But yes, you didn't want your customers to have to see the river, so you just sealed it off from view. This was so common for buildings to do in Chicago, they actually gave it a name. They called it back to the river. So if you were going down the river in Chicago, you wouldn't see any windows. There wouldn't be any windows facing you. Now you can see the tune has changed. They've covered in windows on this side now, and it's actually illegal to develop on the Riverwalk in downtown Chicago and not have your Riverwalk be public. That may be a little bit confusing after I say this next bit, because if you look to the left, That is a gated community on the river in downtown Chicago. Now the reason I said that's confusing, I said your Riverwalk has to be public. How can this be gated? Well, this is Kinsey Park. It is a gated community, but they actually open the gates during the daytime and then they close them at night. So you can walk on the Kinsey Park Riverwalk. I will warn you guys though, if you do walk on that Riverwalk, you cannot call it a Riverwalk. It is a gated community. You gotta use the fancy term, you gotta call it a promenade. Here's the luxury word, right? Gotta fit in. Gated community. Kinsey Park. Now on the right-hand side, you're going to see past the bridge here, this shorter red brick building. Now that's called the Chicago River Lofts, and it's a great example of something called adaptive reuse in architecture. Now adaptive reuse, simplifying that, that's like recycling a building. Now this used to be an old raw paper material warehouse, this red brick building here. It is now loft-style apartments. Now a big indication of an adaptive reuse apartment building is the balconies. Notice how each of these little black balconies have these two little rope-like supports on the sides of them, supporting them against the side of the building. That is a big indication that that building was used for something else previously, and those balconies were added afterwards. Now, this is a very popular thing to do in Chicago because it saves a lot of money, because you are not having to design an entirely new building and build it up. You just have to redesign it, and it's saving a lot of construction costs. Again, that's called adaptive reuse, and this is actually loft-style apartments. And loft-style apartments really aid to an adaptive reuse building. They're usually simplistic. There's not a lot of walls around them, mostly around the bathrooms and the bedroom. Also, there's a lot of exposed brick and piping, so perfect for an old warehouse. Now on the right-hand side, you're going to notice we're approaching a park right here. Now this park, it's called Montgomery Park, named after the founder of the Montgomery Ward Catalog Company. Now I'm going to talk about him in just a moment, that millionaire, why we have a park named after him. But before I do, I want to talk about the building that's in the very center of the park right here. Now in the very middle of the park, you're going to see this building. It almost looks like it's a trapezoid in shape with a white line skeletal structure wrapping around the outside of it. Now that is Kingsbury on the park, and as we move further down, you'll notice it has a sibling. It looks very similar with those same white lines wrapping around the outside, but it's more rectangular in shape with the more jutting out balconies. That is Erie on the park. Kingsbury and Erie on the park were designed by Lucien Lagrange in the 1970s, and they are the European industrial style of architecture. Now the European industrial style, what sets that apart from a lot of other styles is the metal framework, the stuff that holds the weight of the building up, the skeletal structure. Usually that is not seen on buildings, it's clad over, but you do see the I-beams on Kingsbury and Erie on the park, the stuff that holds the weight of the building up. That's all on the outside of it. This is intentionally made to make the buildings look unfinished. Now this is not a very popular style of architecture in Chicago, the European industrial style. These are some of the only examples of it. Now let's get back to Aaron Montgomery Ward, the guy that this park is named after. One day after he had become a millionaire, he was looking out his window when he saw something he didn't like. People developing privately on the lakefront. The reason he didn't like this is because in the original town charter for the city, it says that the lakefront should remain free, clear, and open to the public. So how did Aaron Montgomery Ward stop all these private developers building up buildings on the lakefront? He sued them. He sued every single person involved with the development on the lakefront, and during this time, as the people were stopping him, as he was stopping all these people from developing, the people of Chicago were calling Aaron Montgomery Ward the enemy to progress. But thanks to him, a law was passed banning private development on the lakefront, and now we have 28 miles of beautiful, publicly accessible lakefront, including Grant and Millennium Park. Yeah, we have him to thank for that. Now raise the hands. Anybody here been to Grant Millennium Park? Now, it's supposed to be a beautiful week. If you're visiting Chicago, highly, highly recommend a visit to both. If you're visiting, I'm sure you've been there a lot. Now, if you live here, I'm sure you've been there a lot. Now, Grant Park, that's the larger of the two, home to the Buckingham Fountain, one of the largest fountains in the world, pumps 60,000 gallons of water a minute. Now, Grant Park's also considered Chicago's front yard. Now, you can go in one direction in Grant Park, you're going to end up in the museum campus. The museum campus is an area of land where you're going to find the Field Museum, the Shedd Aquarium, and the Adler Planetarium, as well as Soldier Field. And then if you go in the other direction at Grant Park, you're going to end up in the other park in that area called Millennium Park. Now, Millennium Park, connected to Grant Park, it is home to the J. Pritzker Pavilion, a massive amphitheater that hosts a free music series during the summer and the fall in Chicago. But the big attraction in Millennium Park, the thing that a lot of people go there to see, is a sculpture better well known as the Bean. Raise your hands. Who knows what I'm talking about when I say that? The Bean. The artist, Anish Kapoor, he would hate that anybody just raised their hand right now. He hates that name, the Bean, but I'm so sorry, Anish. You shouldn't have made a giant chrome-plated jelly bean. That is what it is. Now, it is called Cloud Gate. That is the actual name of it, but yes, it does look like a giant chrome-plated jelly bean. And whenever I say giant, I do mean giant. It's bigger than this boat. Now, on the right-hand side, you're going to notice this long building here. Now, this long building, it used to be a warehouse for the Montgomery Ward Catalog Company. Think a modern-day Amazon warehouse. They filled packaged orders. Now, whenever this building, to talk about its architecture, it is the prairie style of architecture. In the prairie style, what sets it apart from a lot of other styles is you're not focusing on the height of the building by accentuating the vertical lines, you're focusing on the length of the building by accentuating the horizontal lines, with these long red brick horizontal lines here. Now, he did not design this building, but the architect that is best well known for popularizing the prairie style of architecture is a super well-known architect in the United States, specifically in the Chicago area. The guy I'm talking about's name is Frank Lloyd Wright. Raise the hands, who's heard of that guy, Frank Lloyd Wright? Now, if you grew up in the U.S. and you don't know anything about architecture, but then know the name of one architect, it's probably that guy, Frank Lloyd Wright. Now, he designed a lot of houses in the United States. He didn't do a lot of tall buildings. The only skyscraper he actually designed is in Oklahoma. It's a hotel. But if you want to check out a big concentration of Frank Lloyd Wright's work, you're going to have to go to a suburb of Chicago called Oak Park. Now, I say it's a suburb, but it's so close to the city that some people say it's a neighborhood of the city, but it is considered a separate thing. You can get there on the Green Line, though. Now, Frank Lloyd Wright based his operations there. He lived there. He designed a house for himself there, and he designed a lot of houses for a lot of other people. Now, you can take a walking tour of the Oak Park neighborhood, the historic area, but you cannot go inside of those houses, obviously, because people still live inside them. You can go inside of one Frank Lloyd Wright house inside of Oak Park, though. You can actually go inside of the mansion that he designed himself. Now, if you do go inside of that large prairie-style mansion, it's all single-floor, very interesting-looking building. Go to one of the hallways, and you can do this to any Frank Lloyd Wright house. Go to one of the hallways and then just stand there and take note of how you feel physically. Frank Lloyd Wright made the hallways of his homes purposefully uncomfortable to stand in. This was to push you further into the larger common spaces that he cared about people seeing in his designs, like the kitchen and living room, bedroom, stuff like that. But yes, that's the Frank Lloyd Wright house in Oak Park, Illinois, run by the Frank Lloyd Wright Trust. Now on the right-hand side here, you're going to see a large brick building, and on the corner it says the Chicago Tribune on it. Now that is actually where they print that newspaper, the Tribune. Now that printing press, it can print over 700,000 newspapers every hour. I got a yes or no question for you guys. Do we need 700,000 newspapers every hour anymore? No. Did you believe that both of you said the same thing? I heard no, but we need a casino. That's actually what they are planning in this area. Now, but yes, we don't need that, but that printing press is, or not the casino, but we don't need that printing press to print over 700,000. You put me in an awkward situation. But yes, 700,000 newspapers every hour. It's not being underutilized, though. That printing press is actually shared amongst 4 other newspapers. Now, also, just a fun fact about this building was once voted to be the second ugliest building in the city of Chicago. Now, of course, first question after I said is probably, what's number 1? What's the ugliest building in the city of Chicago? Folks, I would never do that. That would be so wrong of me to disparage a building in such a way. Point it out, call it the ugliest one, the Thompson Center. Anyway, the James R. Thompson Center. Let's get into it. It's widely considered the ugliest building in Chicago. And for those of you who are from Chicago and live here, the Thompson Center has actually been in the news lately because Google just bought it. Yes, Google just bought the ugliest building in Chicago. And interestingly enough, I think the reasons Google bought it are the same reasons that people think it's ugly. First reason, it's very colorful. It's covered in a bunch of thin blue, red, and silver panels on the outside, so perfect for kind of a tech company there. It's also in a very weird shape, perfect for Google. I've been really trying to nail the shape of the Thompson Center. It's difficult. Now, this is what I've landed on. The Thompson Center looks like if somebody tried to make a very large circular stadium that is in a very subtle shape of a cone, and then cut it into a fourth, and then push the fourth onto the side. That pie piece there, that's the Thompson Center. It's hard to describe, but if you want to see it, it's actually a stop on the blue, pink, brown, orange, and purple line trains, also green line. So if you're riding on the L line, listen downtown for the Thompson Center, you can see the ugliest building in Chicago. And now let's get into something that I really love talking about, the history. Now to start with the history of this city, I'm going to start in the year 1673 with 2 guys I've already mentioned, Pierre Marquette and Louis Joliet. Now those were 2 Frenchmen that were tasked by France to find a trade route from Canada through the Mississippi River to the Pacific Ocean. This trade route does not exist. They found a trade route to the Gulf of Mexico, and on their way back up the Mississippi, they encountered a friendly indigenous tribe called the Potawatomi. The Potawatomi told Marquette and Joliet about a shortcut back to Canada through what they called the Ocean of the Illinois. You can probably guess what the Ocean of the Illinois is. It's like Michigan, east of us right now. Now, of course, Marquette and Joliet, they were not looking to settle there. They just logged their findings and they left. That was in 1673. 106 years passed by, and then in 1779, Chicago gets its first non-native citizen and a black Haitian fur trader by the name of Jean-Baptiste Point de Sable. A black Haitian fur trader considered the father of Chicago, and I just said his name wrong. I said how most Chicagoans say his name, Baptiste Point de Sable, but he was a Haitian man. He spoke French, his name was French, and I once had a boat with 56 French high school students on it. They had no problem with correcting me. The way they said I said his name was like nails on a chalkboard to them, but the way to properly pronounce his name, it would be Jean-Baptiste Point de Sable. If you're pronouncing at least slightly correct, I'm not very good at French. He sold beaver pelts, and beaver pelt hats became a massive success doing this, so much so that other people started to settle around his trading post. All these new settlers caught the attention of the American government. Whenever Jean-Baptiste decided to leave his land in 1803, he married a Potawatomi princess named Catherine, sold his land to the U.S., and on that land, the U.S. developed the first military fort built here called Fort Dearborn. Now, Fort Dearborn was built in 1803 and is considered the first major event of Chicago's history. There are 4 major events of our history, and if you're ever wondering what they are, it is the 4 F's. It is the fort, the fire, the fair, and the fair, the fort, the fire, the fair, and the fair, the fort, the fire, the fair, and the fair, the fort, the fire, the fair, and the fair. So you guys remember one thing that I say on the tour today? Do you know what it's going to be? The fort, the fire, the fair, and the fair. Fort Dearborn, that was the first one, built in 1803. Slow-moving population-wise till 1817. That's when the Erie Canal gets put in, brings a whole lot of trade to the Great Lakes. So much so, by 1839, we have a population of 4,000 people, and we were officially dubbed the City of Chicago. Population really revs up after that, so much so, by October 8th of 1871, we have a population of over 300,000 people, and the reason I distinguish that day is because that was the day that something bad happened. Everybody guess what that was? The fire, the second F. Now, I have another question for you guys. I'm looking for a one-word answer here. If you know it, just yell it out. Who or what started the Chicago fire? Cow. Captain O'Leary's cow, can be specific about it. The story goes, if you don't know, Captain O'Leary, a Chicago woman, went downstairs to milk her cow Daisy. Daisy got spooked, knocked over a lantern, burned half the city of Chicago to the ground. Y'all ready to get your minds blown? It wasn't a cow. If you remember a second thing on the tour today aside from Fort, Fire, Fair, it's that Daisy the cow is innocent. She was completely exonerated of her crimes in the 90s. The 1990s, not the 1890s. She was long since dead. Now, the reason we know Daisy the cow did not start the fire is the newspaper reporter that put that in his story, blamed the O'Learys, admitted on his deathbed that it was completely fabricated, made up to sell newspapers. Now, that is a crazy aspect of the story of the Chicago fire. Not the craziest part, in my opinion. The craziest part, in my opinion, are the actual real theories as to how the fire began. I'm going to share these 3 theories with you. I promise everyone that they are based in facts. Now, the first theory. The fire may have been burnt down by the the barn may have been burnt down by the mafia due to the O'Leary's gambling debts. Sounds wild, like an HBO drama. I'm in. Second favorite theory. The fire may have been started by space rocks. Hear me out, I'm not crazy. Peshtigo, Wisconsin, as well as another neighboring city in Michigan, were almost completely leveled that exact same night by fires that were proven to be started by meteor showers. That was proven, so it's hard to believe that's the same reason the Chicago fire started. And then my third favorite and final theory is that the O'Leary's neighbor, by the name of Peg Leg O'Sullivan, that was his real name, you can Google it, it said that he dumped out his pipe onto the O'Leary's lawn, causing it to set on fire. The fire was immensely damaging, burned through 17,000 buildings, 250 people lost their lives, 4 miles of the city were burnt through, and the only reason the fire stopped burning after 2 days of burning straight, it started to rain. Rain stopped the Chicago fire. Now, after that rain occurred, a huge rebuild occurred over the course of 20 years. And begins that rebuild as well as the other 2 F's, the fair and the fair, to get further down the South Branch. But now let's get back into talking about some buildings. Now, the next building I'm talking about is ahead of us on the right, and it is past the train tracks here. It's called 150 North Riverside, and this building always comes with its own hand movement. What I mean by that, now y'all are all watching me, but also I'm watching you guys, and every time somebody notices this building and they want somebody else to look at it, they're always going to do one of 3 things. Something like this, huh, what, or something like this. Peace and love, or a little pinch, because looking at the bottom of the building, you're going to notice it is built on a very small base, and it goes outwards from the bottom. Now, the reason for this building's out of shape, for the longest time, the land that this building sits on was not being used. It was too small. There was a river on this side, train tracks out of the very restricting space, but then Getch & Partners had the nifty idea in 2017, let's build a skyscraper that starts with a base of a much smaller building that actually fits in those parameters, and then it goes outwards from the bottom. Favorite thing about 150 North Riverside is look up at the slanted glass right now. You can see the full reflection of our boat in the slanted glass. I can actually wave to you guys right here. Hi. Now, the way that this building is possible. Do you guys see these thick silver I-beams? There are 8 of them going up the side of the building there. Now those I-beams, they are made of the world's strongest steel that is developed in Luxembourg. They go all the way up the side of the building and down into the bedrock underground. Now that's what helps it at the bottom of the building, but there's also something that helps this building at the very top. At the very top on the inside, we can't see this thing, it's 4 giant tanks of water called a mass damper system. If the wind blows that building in any direction, those giant tanks of water are then sent the opposite way, counterbalancing that wind resistance. It's a counterweight system. Now, right next to us here, we have the Boeing Building. Fun fact about this building, it was built on top of Amtrak train tracks. So what that means is the Boeing Corporation owns this building, but they have to pay for the air that the building occupies. That is because in the United States we have something called air rights. If you purchase property here, you own all of the air above it, so nobody can develop on top of you. So Boeing does have to lease the air from Amtrak. They're going to pay Amtrak for the air. Now the taller side of the Boeing building that we've passed to this point, it is being supported by a stilt system surrounding the train tracks underneath it, but the shorter side of the Boeing building has no underneath support. No stilts, no foundation, nothing underneath that side of the building supporting it, because that side of the building was built on top of switching tracks, which take up too much room. So that side is not standing at all, it's hanging. If you look behind the boat right now, at the top of the shorter side of that building, you're going to see a very large white X. Y'all see that? That large white X is called a truss. It is gripping the top of the building like this. If I would hold the cup from the top like that, and there are 5 of those trusses lined up one after the other, gripping the top of that building and suspending it on those switching tracks, making it to the point where you can actually walk up to part of the Boeing building and run your hand underneath it. There's nothing underneath. Now on the right next to us, that's 2 North Riverside Plaza. It's a great example of an Art Deco style building. Now a few components of Art Deco style before it loses our view. You're going to see sweeping vertical lines that draw your eye up, a setback when the tower is set back against the base. And a lot of Art Deco buildings are a large geometric form that are symmetrical. They're the same on both sides. Now on the right-hand side, these next 4 buildings, they all make up what's called the Gateway Center, starting with these first 2 black identical ones. Now this first one here, its name is Gateway 1. The second one down on the right-hand side, its name is Gateway 2. The third one down on the right, that white building there, its name is Gateway 3. And the fourth one down on the right, that green glass building with the curve to it. Anybody guess the name of that one? Stephanie, known as Gateway 4. Yes, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now these first 2, completely identical buildings. They are that international style of architecture that was created by Mies van der Rohe, but they were not designed by Mies van der Rohe, they were designed by students of his. Now when talking about the international style, I said that he got rid of all that fancy ornamentation that had been getting put on the outside of the buildings. There is still some ornamentation on these buildings though, it's just sneaky, it's hard to tell. In between the windows, you're going to see these bumped up little lines. Those serve no structural purpose whatsoever. They're just meant to draw your eye upward, making the building appear taller. And then moving on to Gateway 3, that white building there. Fun fact about it once changed colors. The entire building used to be dark gray, but it was clad in something called precast limestone paneling. So Skidmore, Owings & Merrill had no problem saying, let's get rid of that boring old gray color, zhuzh it up a little bit with the ever more exciting white. And that's exactly what they did. And if you want to know what the building looked like before, check out the bottom floor of the building. That coloration never changed. It is still that dark gray. And moving on to Gateway 4, the green glass building that I called Stephanie. That was designed by James DiStefano, and he was asked in an interview, why didn't you put any ornamentation on your building? His response was, I did. I covered my building in a bunch of mirrors so that all the surrounding buildings would be my building's ornamentation. And as you can see the reflection of Gateway 3's ornamentation onto Gateway 4, so he succeeded in that. And now, folks, I'd be remiss if I did not say, look up right now and to the left. There she is. That's the tallest building in Chicago. Now, do not worry. I'm going to go into the details of this building a lot. But that's after we're turned around, going back down this side of the river. The next building I'm talking about is ahead of us on the left. This black box building with the big gray slab on the side of it. Now, the designer of this building, he really wanted to get his building on the map. But how is this guy going to get his building on the map? Well, he was going to put a map on his building. This is the world's largest "You Are Here" sign. The wide light gray strip on the right, that's the south branch of the river where we're heading. Carry us up to the center of the building. We're going to see that little red plug. That is where we are. That is our boat. And that is how he got his building on the map. Put a map on his building. Now, change of subject, something very near and dear to my heart, movies. I love movies. A lot of great movies have been shot right here in Chicago. Ferris Bueller's Day Off, The Blues Brothers, just a few of them. But my favorite Chicago shot film was shot right downtown, most of it, and has nothing to do with Chicago. It came out in 2008, doesn't even take place in Chicago. It takes place in Gotham City. Raise a hand, who knows what I'm talking about? Anybody? Yeah, 2008 Batman film, The Dark Knight. Now, the opening scene of that movie is a bank robbery that was filmed on the opposite side of those windows, right there on the inside of this building. Yeah, the corner of this building, this is where the First National Bank of Gotham was, but actually, the building is the old post office building for the city of Chicago. Now, you may notice this building is huge. It is no longer used as a post office. You can see the companies that shown on the outside there, but the reason for its large size, whenever it was used as a post office, that was when Chicago was the catalog capital of the world. So a massive catalog operation reliant on the mail, in turn, of course, is going to give you a massive mail operation. But whenever those catalog companies sort of lost relevancy, moved out of the city, the Postal Service put this building up for sale, where it was purchased by a British land developer with the last name of Davies. Now, Mr. Davies, he held onto the building and kept it empty for many, many, many years, but constantly entertained offers on the building. He would talk with people, meet with them, talk to them about selling, never sell. This really annoyed the city of Chicago because you may notice we just went underneath a highway. That highway goes through the post office building, it always has, so the city of Chicago told Mr. Davies, if you do not sell this building and it starts crumbling on top of our road, we're declaring eminent domain and taking the building from you. Mr. Davies sells the post office immediately for $175 million. I do not know where the lesson is in this story, but I have to believe that there is one, because the day after Mr. Davies made that $175 million sale, Mr. Davies died. I know, it's a very shocking end to the story, but do not worry, folks, it gets worse. The reason they say he constantly entertained offers on the building was he had no friends, no next of kin. He was lonely, and that was his chance to talk to someone. That is unfortunately true. I have no positive spin on that story, but it's a great example of a lot of stories in history. Sometimes they're only just going to be a bummer. Now, the Postal Service, very creative, so they put the new post office headquarters in Chicago. It's right there, it's right next door. Now, this is still a post office, and it actually has a beautiful lobby. It's almost like a ballroom inside that post office. Now, when asked why they made the lobby so nice, the architect did have an answer. He said that post offices in the United States often work on a deficit. So I want them to be able to rent that space out for, I quote, weddings and bar mitzvahs. Because if you have ever planned your dream wedding, what are the two words that keep popping into your head? Post office. Anybody want to guess how many times that's been used for an event space? 0, goose egg, no many times. And we'll tell you though, it's used every day as a post office. You can go there as long as it's not a post office holiday. Now, speaking about post office lobbies that got redesigned, actually, the first post office building that I talked about, that giant one, now it's no longer used as a post office, but its lobby recently got redesigned into a common area. So you can actually go there, it's like a food court, shopping area, beautifully designed area. Highly recommend checking that out. Now, going back to an architect I've already talked about today, Bertrand Goldberg, the guy that designed the Corn Cob buildings in Chicago. He has another building on the tour today. Could you all point to it if you've noticed it? Yes, it's ahead of us on the left-hand side, this Jetsons looking building here. Now, a big thing about Bertrand Goldberg's work you may notice, it's weird looking. Why does it look like that? Well, I do have an answer. Bertrand Goldberg's philosophy when it came to design was there are no right angles in nature, so there shouldn't be any right angles in architecture, explaining the odd rounded shape of his buildings. Now, this one's called Riverside, and it was also built like a city inside of a city, because another very interesting thing about Bertrand Goldberg's career was that he was a major trendsetter when it came to residential buildings in Chicago. The Corn Cobs, the first residential towers built downtown. River City here was the first residential building built in the South Loop. Nowadays, most buildings in the South Loop are luxury residential apartment buildings. This one was built in the 1980s. Still a few active city inside of a city aspects inside of this building. Now you can see on the first floor here, you can probably guess what that is. That's still a fully operational daycare. And on the opposite side of those big row of bubbly windows that we passed, that is actually the indoor park, because nothing says the great outdoors like the great indoors. Now on the right hand side, furthest thing that you can see on the right is a white and red radio tower. It's also past the parking garage that says Marshall's on the corner, and it's almost flush with my body right now. It's also the tallest thing you can see on the right hand side. If you're looking further down on the right, you'll see that. The reason I'm being so intense about everybody seeing that radio tower is because that radio tower is standing on the site of the O'Leary's barn. That is where the Chicago fire started. Now, to put the damage of the fire into perspective, once again, it's poking up from behind the Marshall's parking garage. Everything we have seen up until this point would have been gone, just a pile of smoking ash. Now, the reason that radio tower is there today, if I can be candid, it's kind of funny. That is the main firefighter training facility for the entire city of Chicago. That's where we get all of our firefighters, where the Chicago fire started. Chicagoans being the ever-lovers of irony and a little bit of dark humor. Now, on the right-hand side here, this building is probably the building in Chicago that's at the highest risk for getting demolished. This used to be an old coal power plant for the Union train station here. Now, the main reason it won't get adapted into something new, it was an old coal power plant. They burned coal in this building for many, many, many years. When you do that, it essentially destroys the guts of the building, making it more expensive to redesign instead of just knocking down and building up something new. Coal dust, it's carcinogenic, it's also radioactive, so it is bad news. You do not want to be messing with it. And now, folks, let's get back into our history. So after the fire of 1871, a huge rebuild occurred over the course of 20 years. Now, during that rebuild, something very interesting happened. Queen Victoria, the Queen of England, had heard about the fire and felt really bad that we lost our library. So what did the Queen of England do for us? She sent us 5,000 books to restart the library. Very nice of her. Weird detail about that story is, before the Chicago fire, we did not have a library. Don't know where she got that. But when the Queen of England sent you 5,000 books, you better start that library, and that is how we started the Chicago Public Library. Now, after that great rebuild, we were in the 1890s at that point, and we really needed to bring people into our second city. That's why we're called the second city. Like I said, the first one burnt down. Now, how are we going to bring people in? Well, we heard about a World's Fair coming to America. We were in the 1890s at that point. This World's Fair was going to take place in 1893. It was going to be called the Columbian World's Fair and Exposition, and it was going to be the answer to Paris's World's Fair of 1889, just a few years before. Now, we really needed and wanted to host this World's Fair, but so did New York, Philadelphia, Boston, all major cities wanted to host this fair, so all of those cities sent their best politicians, the cream of the crop, stand-up citizens, good guys all around, to Washington, D.C. to lobby for their cities to get to host the fair. Chicago sent some of their politicians as well. The reason I separate those guys is because those guys were not stand-up citizens, not good guys all around. Where everybody else sent their best politicians, Chicago sent their most corrupt, their most talkative, and their most dishonest, and the best guys for the job. Now, those guys were so aggressive in D.C., they would pull people into offices, corner them in bathrooms, just talking the ear off of Washington about why we deserve to host the fair. Stretching the truth a little bit to the point where the other D.C. politicians started calling the Chicago ones windbags for blowing hot air all around Washington. Now, the reason I mention this aggressive tactic worked. We did win the right to host the World's Fair, yay! But it annoyed a lot of people. A New York reporter put in his story after we won the World's Fair, "I cannot believe they gave the World's Fair to those windy windbags from that windy city blowing nothing but hot air." Fun fact about that article, it was the first use of the nickname the Windy City. And here's the real kicker, we are the 50th windiest city in the United States. 50, not 15th, 50th. So we are not the windiest city. We do not get that nickname from wind velocity. Amarillo, Texas is number one if you're curious. So yes, we do not get that nickname from wind velocity. We get it from corrupt politicians blowing hot air in the 1890s. Score 2 for Chicago. Now, we did win the right to host the World's Fair, though. Excellent, wonderful. But we were expecting a lot of people at that World's Fair. We were originally expecting 22 million. We ended up getting 27 million. That's a lot of people, especially considering the fact the U.S. population at the time was 60 million. So nearly half of the U.S. was coming to our city. So we put a really smart guy in charge, an architect by the name of Daniel Burnham. Daniel Burnham said, how am I going to fit all these people in my city? I'm going to build a city inside of my city. And that's what he did. In Jackson Park, further down south, he built this city inside of a city out of staff. Staff is very cheap and easy to build with building material. And he painted every building the same color that she was painted at the time, white. He also gave the fairgrounds a very creative name, but I know what it was called. The White City. Now, another big task that Daniel Burnham had ahead of him is how am I going to light the White City? I'm not using candles for an obvious reason. Well, lucky for him, an inventor by the name of Thomas Edison had invented this nifty new thing called the light bulb. It made its major debut at that World's Fair of 1893 as the main lighting source, the fairgrounds. Not the only invention that made its debut at that World's Fair, though. The world's first moving walkway, what you see at airports, people movers, that made its debut at the World's Fair of 1893. My favorite, yoga made its introduction to the United States that year. Also, favorite things to talk about are the food items that made their introduction. Juicy fruit gum, fried ice cream, the world's first brownie, Vienna sausages, the world's first all-beef hot dog, the sort of Americanization of the Frankfurter. That actually was introduced to that World's Fair as well. Pabst Blue Ribbon beer won its titular blue ribbon at that World's Fair. Fun fact about that blue ribbon, it was a participation prize. And know what you're thinking, if you've ever tried PBR, that makes sense, it is definitely a beer. It does exist. Now also, Milton Hershey of Hershey Caramel Company at the time had been working on a milk chocolate recipe that he had been working on, or that he introduced at that World's Fair, becoming Hershey Chocolate Company. But the biggest invention at that World's Fair, the actual physically biggest, was the main attraction. Now the main attraction to Paris's World's Fair, that was the Eiffel Tower, designed by Gustave Eiffel. Gustave offered Daniel Burnham to design a second Eiffel Tower, twice the size of the one in Paris, in Jackson Park. Daniel Burnham said no. He wanted an American to design the main attraction, but lucky for him, an American by the name of George Washington Ferris had just developed a new amusement ride called, and want to guess what it was called? The Gravitron. Yes, it was the Ferris wheel. Yes, Ferris wheel. The first Ferris wheel happened in 1893 at the World's Fair. It was 262 feet tall and it could hold over 1,000 people at a time. Now, that is because each train car was exactly that, a recycled train car that they packed full. They could hold about 100 people at a time, and it being 1893, each of those train cars were not air-conditioned, and it took 1 hour to run revolution around that Ferris wheel, so pretty rough conditions. Yes, that was the World's Fair of 1893. Now, if you look to the left-hand side, you're going to notice we're approaching a park right here. Now, this park, it is called Ping Tom Park. That is where Chinatown is in Chicago. Highly recommend a visit to our Chinatown. I think ours is one of the best in the country. Great food, great shopping. Now, Ping Tom. You're going to see a bust of him beside that pagoda there, that statue of the man's head. That structure is called a pagoda. The statue beside it is of Ping Tom. Now, Ping Tom lobbied for years during the 70s and 80s for this park to be built because after the interstate got put in through Chinatown, it destroyed all the park systems. He didn't like this, so he lobbied for years for a park to be built. Unfortunately, he never got to see it completed. This was completed in 1991 after Ping Tom had passed away. Now, he is immortalized inside the park. He's not the only one paid tribute to in the park, though. If you want to walk around this park, which I do recommend, it's beautifully designed, you're going to see a lot of references to trains and railroads. This is a tribute to the Chinese immigrants that essentially built the entirety of the North American rail system. Now, speaking of rail systems, look at this bridge right here, this rail bridge, Continental Railway Bridge. It is actually a vertical lift bridge, and it's the oldest vertical lift bridge in the world, or at least one of them. It was built in 1914, it's over 100 years old, and this bridge still is fully mechanically functioning. Now, of course, trains always go across it all the time, but also, this bridge still lifts over 100 feet, over 50 feet in the air using a very rudimentary counterweight system. Now, those counterweights, I like to point them out, those giant concrete slabs at the top of the two side towers there, those are the counterweights. Those move down, pulling the center of the bridge up, making it so that bridge only runs on a 100 horsepower motor, and I think you guys are actually going to get to see a train go across the bridge soon. Yeah, I definitely think you're going to be able to, and they're going to make a lot of noise as they're going across the bridge, I think. They tend to. There they are. Where are they? There they are. There we go. There's the choo-choo. They should be able to see you. Do the classic truck driver thing. I'm waiting to get back into the 4th F as where I'm waiting today because they may really lay on that horn there. I don't know. It depends on the driver, right? Cool. Now, I talked about the fort, I've talked about the fire, I've talked about the fair. There is one more thing I need to talk about today. Can anybody tell me what that is? The fair, yes, somebody said France. Shame on you. Yes, fair. Fort, fire, fair. Now, the fair of 1933, that happened during the Great Depression. It was called the Century of Progress. Now, the Century of Progress World's Fair happened during the Great Depression, and the big message of that World's Fair was if we as a country are going to get out of this financial hardship, we need to focus on science, technology, and innovation going into the future. Now, if you're interested in exhibits that focused on science and technology, the General Motors Company had a live assembly line. You can actually watch people build cars and motors live. Another thing you could watch live, a little bit more bizarre, premature babies being incubated in incubation chambers, being cared for by doctors and nurses. You can go into a large room, watch this happen, watch those babies be incubated, showing off the new technology of infant incubation. Also, a fun fact about the World's Fair of 1933, it did not take place in the White City in Jackson Park. The White City no longer stands. It took place in the Rainbow City. Now, the Rainbow City had a different color for every building, and it was actually on the lakefront. That is where the Grant Park, Millennium Park, and the museum campus are. Now, a few introductions at that World's Fair that I wanted to mention. The L line got added on to, as well as the third rail, the thing that powers most electric train systems in major American cities. That made its debut at that World's Fair. My least favorite invention that was introduced to that World's Fair was by Kraft Foods. Miracle Whip made its debut at that World's Fair of 1933. If you don't know what that is, they originally advertised it as a miracle product. It could be savory, it could be sweet, like a cake icing. Now most people use it as mayonnaise. I don't use it at all. But that's my least favorite. I'm going to tell you my favorite thing that was introduced at that World's Fair. My favorite thing that was introduced at that World's Fair was not a product. It wasn't even a thing. It was a person. Judy Garland made her concert singing debut at that World's Fair. If you don't know who that is, 6 years after that, in 1939, Judy Garland went on to star as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. So one of the most iconic movie stars of all time made her debut at the World's Fair of 1933. And folks, that's the fort, the fire, the fair, and the fair. And now I'm going to hop off the mic for about 5 minutes as we're heading back down the south branch of the river. During this time, feel free to meander about the boat, visit the bar downstairs. Also during this time, this is not my break. If you guys have any questions, what's that building? What's the meaning of life? What's your favorite color? If it's any of those, that building is the Willis Tower. The meaning of life is 42, and my favorite color is purple. But if you have any other questions, I'll be right here. Feel free to come and ask, meander about the boat, visit the bar. I'll get back on the mic as I get closer to the downtown area. Thank you guys. Enjoy the cruise portion of your tour.
Chicago to